Okay, we're live. How are you doing, Alexander?
I'm doing very well. We're living through very exciting times. Lots going on. Obviously, Ukraine, Taiwan too, it would seem, and of course, all sorts of political things going on in many countries, and a gas crisis deepening across Europe.
Yeah, lots to talk about. So we'll just we'll take questions from YouTube, from Odyssey, from Rumble, of course, our locals community. I'll also dig into our Telegram as well and see if there's any questions there, and we'll answer super chats and Rumble rants, and we'll go for about an hour, maybe 30 minutes, and just talk about whatever news topics our viewers want to talk about. But we haven't done this in a long time, Alexander. For just like 2 minutes, let's just see where people are watching us from, because we have not done this for a long time. So let's do an around the globe here. Where's everyone joining us from, real quick, and then we'll get started. And I've got my first question to you, Alexander, which I'll throw at you. So let's see. We got Haiti with us. Haiti is in the house. Cyprus. Okay, awesome. Las Vegas, Nevada, Australia. Let's see where else. Israel, Norway, Houston, Toronto, Perth, Central Coast, NSW, Mexico. Let's see. I'm going across all the different platforms, so just be patient with me. South Africa, Belgium, Manchester, Australia, Bangalore, Detroit, Yorkshire. It's not Yorkshire. It's Yorkshire. Correct, Alexander?
Yorkshire, Yorkshire. That's absolutely right. Yes,
Yorkshire.
Absolutely, an amazing county. Yorkshire, an amazing county, by the way. One of the biggest in England, and one of the most interesting, and one of the most wonderful, and one of the most beautiful in many places.
All right, Warsaw, Canada, Newcastle, Perth, Ireland, South India, NYC, Qatar, South Africa again, Malaysia, Atlanta, Niagara Falls, Czechia, Australia, London calling, Melbourne, Georgia, USA, Chicago, Germany, Romania, Texas, Trinidad and Tobago, Belgium, California, Russia, New York, Detroit, Cyprus again. All right, Cyprus is representing. Sydney, Australia, Berlin, Thailand, Isle of Man, Macedonia, Vienna, St. Petersburg, New Zealand, Kiev, Serbia, Finland. Wow. Norfolk, Grenada. All right, Alexander, let's thank you for joining us, everybody, on this Thursday.
Well, thank you for joining us from all over the world, it would seem. Very exciting,
all over the world. Brazil, Serbia again, Stockholm, Hollywood, Virginia, Michigan, Maryland, Langley. Oh, Langley. Toronto, Central Coast. All right. All right. So my first question to you, and then I'll jump into the chats and get some questions from there as well. Real quick, let's say hello to our moderators. I see that the one and only Valies is with us moderating. Hello, Valies. How are you? And let me see if there are other moderators as well, Alexander, that we have to give a shout out to. I think that's it. I think Valies, me and you together will be moderating. All right, Alexander, my first question to you, coming from me, is I think you're the best person to answer this as well. So what is going on with Graham Phillips? What can he do with regards to being placed on a sanctions list in the UK legally? What does this mean? What's going on here?
I don't even know the answer. I don't even know the answer to that question, because I mean, to be placed on a sanctions list by your own government seems to me utterly bizarre. Now, I'm going to say this: I don't think this is legal. I think, as a British citizen, he has all the rights under British law. I think for the British government to try to sanction a British citizen makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, there's no suggestion, for example, as far as I can tell, that he's committed any crime. And if anything is done that would or might affect him as a result of these sanctions, freezing accounts, that sort of thing, then I think he has a very, very strong case that he can take to the High Court by way of judicial review and to have it challenged. And that does make me wonder why the British government has done that, and whether they're intending in some way to do something to his citizenship and or to prevent him coming to Britain, which would be outrageous, by the way. I mean, that would be utterly shocking. And if it were done, I would add that it too would be potentially subject to legal challenges. But I've never heard of anything like this before.
This
It
has
seems
never happened
extraordinary.
before?
I've always assumed I've never heard of it happening before. I've assumed up to now that the British government, the governments, don't sanction their own citizens, at least not Western governments where there's a kind of rule of law situation. Can I just say, I not only find it astonishing, I find it incredibly sinister, because it means sanctioning your own citizens means that you are punishing your own citizens without recourse to law, and without due process. So that is unheard of, and it, to my mind, straightforwardly violates, if we're talking about Britain, the key provision of Magna Carta, which is the foundational document in some ways of English common law, which was signed by King John, all the way back in 1215, which says that the king, meaning the state, will not take action against any person except by law and through the courts.
Yeah, Graham Phillips has a YouTube channel blogging on Ukraine, Russia, and Donbass. It's also important to point out that Graham Phillips has been a journalist covering this story since 2014. That's what I remember him coming onto the scene and covering this story from the Donbass. So this is not new for him. He's been covering this story for a good 8-9 years, probably even longer than that. So that's just some background as to who Graham Phillips is. And the UK has placed him on a UK sanctions list.
Yes.
I mean, if this passes through, a final question, if this is let go and the people of the UK just let it happen, what does this mean going forward? I mean, what does that mean legal precedent or what?
Well, it wouldn't be a legal precedent because, of course, this has been done completely outside the law. But let's assume it sticks. It seems to me that it potentially moves us to a position where the British government has created what, if you like, is a parallel mechanism for enforcement, for punishing people, which is entirely outside the law. Now, we've talked about this many times. We've talked about, how, due process has been thrown aside in dealing with people like, say, the truckers in Canada or the farmers in the Netherlands, or those sort of things. But this would be another massive step beyond that. I have to say, it's, to my mind, fundamentally wrong. I mean, wrong at huge levels. And of course, if they do get away with it, if they are able to do it, then they will increasingly do it. They'll come after more and more people, more and more people, presumably eventually in Britain as well. Of course, Graham Phillips isn't in Britain, and that's probably the rationalization for this. But they could do it again to more and more people. Eventually, they might start doing it to people in Britain. And if the courts don't strike it down, well, I think the implications of this are terrifying.
I mean, it is important to point out that he is a British citizen. He has a British passport. I mean, from what I understand, I've never met him. I don't know him, but he grew up in the UK. I mean, this guy's British. I mean, he travels around the world too. It's not only Donbass that he reports from. I mean, he's done documentaries in various different locations as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I have met him. I met him many years ago. I mean, about 8 years ago. But I have met him, and he's as British could be. He is completely British. I mean, you only have to listen to him and, his accent and his ways of speaking, his manners. He's a completely British person. To do this to a British person, it seems to me is astonishing. And as I said, it's incredibly dangerous, and it has terrible implications for the future. And I noticed with deep dismay that the human rights community in Britain, who are so vocal about human rights when they're violated in other places, has said absolutely nothing about this.
Yeah. All right.
I mean, it's not been
go.
reported to any extent here in Britain.
Of course, it hasn't. GEC is also moderating. Thank you, GEC, for helping to moderate the chat. From Rumble, May Medi Bemps says, question, do you think the military may push back against Pelosi's trip to Taiwan due to the risk to all the U.S. military personnel that would be involved?
You would like to think so. Now, Larry Johnson, who we've had on the Duran, has said that to his knowledge, there is one senior member of the US military in the Pacific, of course, he's not telling us who this is, who, on the contrary, is doing everything he possibly can to try and create a crisis and to provoke China. So it looks as if the military is not united in all of this. My overall impression is that the people who run the US nuclear weapon systems, the people in charge of the US's strategic defense systems, are sane, rational people. But I also get the impression that some people in the US have become, in the US military, are now deeply politicized, and they basically want to provoke China. And some of them, anyway, well, most of them, I mean, remember, if they're given an order from the president, do they disobey that order, given that he is the commander-in-chief? So there's all these tensions, and I don't think we should rely on the military to keep us from a crisis over a situation like this.
All right. Let's see here. From Dominique, can you make a video on this stupid war on CO2? It is a major geopolitical issue which is severely undermining the West. Looking at co2coalition.org, it doesn't need to be a specialist to refute the man-made climate change.
I think it's a good topic, and I think it's one we might want to do, perhaps with somebody who is more of a person who understands these things. I take it what you say, you don't need an expert, but I think you do need an expert to make a program like that interesting. But I have to say this, I think it would have to be done on one of our alternative platforms. That's not a reason to not do it, but I think, well, not alternative, one of our, not on YouTube. Let me put it like this. I think YouTube might not be very, very favorable to a program like that, and it might not be seen to be straightforward about it.
Yeah. Will Pelosi be sober during her Taiwan visit? The military officer who is seeking to provoke China is following the script of the officer who provoked Mexico and justified the Mexican War.
Yeah.
Interesting comments.
Yeah. Well, about Pelosi's sobriety, I say no. I make no comment. About the Mexican War, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. RC says, given the current state of the West, are Americans now going to be social pariahs, or will other countries separate the people from their government?
I think that a lot of people around the world do separate people from their government, and I think you would still find in most of the world, in nearly all of the world actually, that Americans as people are not going to be subject to much hostility. But you must never count on this, and I do get the sense that there is a hardening of feelings against the United States around the world at the moment. I think the proof of this is this triumphant tour that Lavrov is carrying out in the Middle East and Africa, which has horrified the Europeans and shocked the Americans. And he's being received everywhere like a hero. It's quite astonishing to see, that they're falling over themselves. All these governments are falling over themselves, to receive Lavrov. And he's just managed to win a big deal in Egypt, which has cancelled its purchases of Ukrainian grain and is going to buy Russian grain instead. Wow. So, I mean, that tells you what people around the world are thinking. You also see,
what
by
a
the
move
way,
that
with
was.
Turkish, absolutely, and Turkish football fans are allegedly taunting Ukrainian fans, with the name of Putin during a game with Dynamo Kiev.
I saw the video. They were
Yeah.
saying that during the football match. And Turkey is also entering into some sort of military purchasing deal with Russia as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read that.
So, I did read that. I did read that. But, I was talking about, popular feeling. Now, of course, football fans taunt each other, but this was a pretty wild thing to do.
Yeah. Sanjeva says, one thing that happened by listening to the Duran is that I fell in love with Greece and Cyprus. Long trip from Australia, but have to visit with my family one day. Sanjeva, you are always welcome.
Delighted to hear that.
Greece or Cyprus, both.
Always welcome. Or Cyprus.
Absolutely. Definitely come with your family. You're going to have a great time in either of the countries or in both. Cyprus is only a 1-hour flight from Greece, so you can easily come to both.
Absolutely.
Arctic Knight says, do you think that the Ukrainian offensive in Kherson might be a preemptive strike to disrupt a Russian offensive?
Yes. I think that's part of the rationale. But I think it's only a part of it. I've come increasingly to the view that the people who are driving this offensive, who are pushing it relentlessly, are the British and to some extent the US intelligence agencies as well. They have to show a victory. This thing is turning into a total debacle. The mood in Europe is souring. The mood in the US is souring. So they want to give some impression of progress. So we talk about, we have missile strikes on this bridge. We have this constant talk about this offensive in Kherson. And I think it's being done more than anything else. I mean, partly, as I said, it's to distract the Russians, confuse them, cause them to send troops to Kherson region, which might have been deployed in other places, perhaps more, offensively, to disrupt a Russian offensive, which we're now getting some indications is actually already underway. That's partly the reason. But I think the major reason is to convince people in the West that this is a course worth supporting, that Ukraine is not going down, that it's still in the fight, and that the West should go on giving it money and weapons and all that, and maintain the sanctions wall.
All right. From Possum Power, thank you for that awesome super chat. Shameless plug. Check out Theti, THETI mapping on YouTube. Smart kid using maps to discuss Ukraine. Tuition paid. Yeah. Okay, so that is, I guess, Possum Power. That is like a military mapping channel, I imagine. Let me know in the chat if I got that right. But the channel is THETI mapping on YouTube.
Mapping, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Sajeva says, Nabulina gave a report about Russia's economy. They seem pretty clear-eyed about things. Seems the main issue is with semiconductors and a technology deficit. Hope they get over it.
Oh, yes. I mean, I read Nabulina's analysis. I would make one point about Nabulina, which is that she's one of these people for whom the bottle is always half empty rather than half full. She is always pessimistic. I mean, it's in her nature. By the way, I think that's not an entirely inappropriate position to be in if you are a central banker. Central bankers should be cautious and careful people. I think that, talking in optimistic or unduly optimistic terms is unwise. But, I read her report, and overall, it's interesting to see that her mood has lightened about the Russian economy with every report that she's made since February. Just to quickly say, Russia's experiencing falling prices for 9 weeks in a row. In other words, not just inflation, but prices are actually declining in Russia. There seems to be an industrial recovery underway. And of course, living standards are growing and bank deposits are growing. So things are being put in place for a boom. And in the meantime, there's been a lot of discussions within the government about, how to close any gaps in the economic system. and there's been a lot of discussions with Putin in the chair, and he's had a meeting about semiconductors and microchips and all that, and he's also had one about the aviation industry and all kinds of discussions of that kind. Let me repeat again, Russia does make semiconductors. It does make chips. They may not be up to the level of the chips in Taiwan and South Korea, but they do make quite a lot of medium level chips, and they can certainly increase production. And the latest indications are that China is now getting very close to producing more sophisticated chips. They've apparently developed a new foundry that apparently is able to approach Taiwanese levels of, chip size, producing chips of that kind of power. And China is, of course, by far Russia's biggest supplier of chips. Russia imports most of its chips from China and Malaysia. And I suspect those chips from Malaysia are, to a great extent, Chinese also. So, it's not the big crisis that people imagine. Though what I think the priority for the Russians is to make themselves self-sufficient now in all of these technologies.
All right. Please invite Alex Epstein for your episode regarding CO2. We'll definitely check him out. Let's see here. Alex says, can you tell me how you're able to monitor Western news? Because after 5 minutes, I'm ready to punch the TV.
Very good question. Well, one gets used to it. One does get used to it after a while. I mean, it does help a lot if you're getting alternative news, which you can rely upon. And you do get a sense after a while who you can rely upon. So, you have to do it because it's inevitable. It's part of our work. But I'm not going to deny it's easy.
Yeah. RC says, in a new multipolar world, is the U.S. solidifying its hold on Canada, Europe, in contrast to the Eurasian bloc? Seems the U.S. has lost Latin America.
Yeah, well, I think what the US is going to do is it's going to consolidate its control definitely over the Five Eyes, the core alliance: Canada, Britain, New Zealand, Australia. That's the core US alliance, the Anglosphere. I think Europe actually, at the beginning of this conflict, I thought that they'd won over Europe. I think this is beginning to look more ragged. I think that the situation in Europe is now so bad that it's only a matter of time, I think, before people start to question what the US has led Europe into. And all that talk about a Kherson offensive may be intended in part to reassure the Europeans that, this is all going to turn out right in the end, and you should stick with the US because, ultimately we will be the winners in this, as we've been in the past.
Yeah. Redus, thank you for that super sticker. Ryan says, very concerned about Trudeau's fertilizer emissions cuts. Too bad we can't fertilize with the manure coming from politicians' mouths.
I agree with both your concern and your comment.
Yeah. T-Bone says, Alex, do the Trudeau voice. Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure on the live stream to do the voice. Let's see here. Let's see. Ring, ring. Yes, this is Klaus Schwab. Klaus, this is Justin Trudeau from Canada. Yes, Justin. What is going on? Klaus, how can I get rid of all that fertilizer and get closer to the great reset, Klaus? Please tell me. I'll end it there. I don't have any more. That's my.
Do go onto Alex's channel. It's very wonderful.
First time I've done it on a live stream, but sometimes when I walk the streets and people hear it, Alexander, they kind of look at me funny. Some of the Greeks are like walking by, going, "What's wrong with this guy? Is that Justin Trudeau that I hear?" Let's see. Angry Wahawk says, "Will the USA become like an Argentina with nukes?" That's an interesting comment.
Oh, very interesting comment. And can I just say, a very interesting comment given Argentina's history. I mean, right up to the period around the Second World War, Argentina was universally seen as a rich country and as a success story I was actually lending money to France at one time, if you go back, far enough in the history. I don't think so. I think that the United States has resources on a scale that Argentina has never had. And I think that the political system in the United States, the political structure, I should say, in the United States, the constitution and all that, are much more stable than they have been in Argentina, which has had, a history of coups and all that sort of thing. So I don't think so. But I have to always say this. I mean, it's partly my wish. So, when I say that I don't think it will happen, the wish, the desire to see the United States come through, perhaps is affecting my judgment on these things. But I still don't think so. I think looking at the United States, its resources, its resilience, its constitutional system, I think it will pull through.
Okay. From Damnation, welcome to the Duran community. Sanctioning Graham is an abuse of power to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I made my views about that very clear.
Yeah. Jungle Jin says, regarding Taiwan, why risk nuclear war by sinking a carrier when simply damaging the flight deck would render it and the whole group basically useless?
I'm not going to discuss this. I don't want to talk about what the Chinese might or might not do. I don't want to be preempting any moves. All I would say is I think it's an absolutely reckless idea to send a carrier to Taiwan or at this particular time. And I hope that the Chinese don't act recklessly in turn in response to the deployment of this carrier.
This is exactly what Clinton did in 97, correct?
Yeah, absolutely correct.
So doesn't this confirm that it is the Clintonite wing of the Biden White House that has concocted this whole Chinese strategy with regard to Speaker of the House going to China, and now we'll send a carrier? I mean, this is like copy paste, isn't it?
It's exactly copy paste. It's exactly the same, and of course, it's exactly the same people. They're doing what Bill did, managed, pulled it off back in 97. So let's do it again. Let's rub the noses of the Chinese into this and send the carrier. But of course, in 97, China was a weak country. It barely had a strong military. Its military was very outdated. I mean, today the situation is so profoundly different that it's utter folly to do it. To think that what worked in 97 would necessarily work again.
All right. Chillin67 says, keep it up. Nick says, how far the mighty have fallen. Thank you. Oh, Nick, I just lost it. Where was that question? Thank you very much for your hard work. Thank you, Nick, for that. Black Tie says, is the EU now Putin's puppet?
No, I wish if it was, we might actually get some rational decision making. It's not Putin's puppet. I mean, it's what it is finding is that, of course, it hugely underestimated him and Russia, and that its expectations of a Russian collapse have proved wrong. Whereas, of course, the EU itself is now in a critically difficult situation. So, and they don't really have a response and an answer. They don't really know what to do with this situation. I mean, I both Alex and I have done programs about this 15% gas cut idea, and it's not even a plan. It doesn't really hold together. It's not. It's just more rhetoric again. So they're in a very difficult position. They're up against a master poker player, and they've run out of cards. But that doesn't mean that they're his puppets.
Yeah. Pathetic Albion says, amen. Alexander carrier diplomacy will not end nicely.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. From Euro Gabor says, Orban is in Vienna. Austrians got a whiff of the so far positive Russian stand on the extra 700M CM3 gas request of the Hungarians. Medvedev should be nominated for the cartographist of the century. Yeah, did you see that map? Those two maps.
Yeah,
Alexander, that Medvedev put out on Telegram.
Yes, I did, absolutely. I mean, he's interesting that he's coming out on this like this all the time. But I mean, it's come as a shock to many people who I think imagined that he was this Atlantic integrationist. I never bought all that story at all. I've said this all the time. And as I said, I think people who persist in insisting that he somehow changed his views are quite wrong about this. But no, I did see those maps and they're fascinating.
They're fascinating. Yeah. Darren Levy says, hope you're doing well. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Darren, for that. C. Mavuso says, don't you think sending an envoy to stop the war and cancel the sanctions will be a good idea?
Oh, it's an excellent idea, but who's going to do it? Now, Gerhard Schroeder, the former chancellor, the man who originally thought up the idea of Nord Stream 1, and eventually it evolved into Nord Stream 2 as well. He's in Moscow, apparently, on a rather mysterious private visit. And there's some rumors that he's been sent there by big German industrial groups. He was very close to Volkswagen at one time, for example. But I can't say that he looks like an emissary at the moment. He might become that eventually, but there's so much hostility to Schroeder in some parts of the European system that I wonder whether he could really pull it off.
Southern Bird says, is Russia going to open up its diplomatic training facilities to BRICS countries for students to learn diplomacy?
Yes, I thought to some extent they already did. I mean, diplomatic training in Russia takes place in basically two institutions. I mean, you go to school, and then you pass. You then go to IMEMO, the School of International Relations and World Economy, set up by Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's foreign minister, back in the 40s, by the way. So it's been there a long, long time. But that's a sort of general place. That's where you get your equivalent of a BA, your first degree, and sometimes you stay and you go on to do your master's or the equivalent, Russian equivalent of a master's. And then there is a formal diplomatic academy where Russian diplomats are trained, which is I've actually seen the building. I've never been inside, but I've passed it and I've seen it in Moscow. So it's a fairly long training process before you get there.
Yeah. Maria Karic, thank you for that super sticker. Jackie, thank you for that super sticker. Do it your own way. Thank you for that super sticker. Budweiser, thank you for that super sticker. Commando Crossfire says, as their dominance is increasingly challenged, the slippery slope will turn into a cliff, and rule of law, ideas of democracy, will be cast aside in vain attempts to hold on to power. I am the state, in quotes.
Well, indeed, absolutely. And that's why we're seeing things like this sanctioning of Graham Phillips, which has profoundly shocked me, actually.
Yeah, it's shocked me too. Perkina says Germany's prosperity is a result of cheap energy from Russia. So it logically means that development of Eastern EU is highly a consequence of that also. But we are barking on Russia here in Lithuania. Excellent point.
Absolutely excellent point. This is totally true. Can I just say, well, there's a very dangerous myth that's emerged that, the Germans somehow launched all these economic links, these gas links with Russia, because out of some kind of sense of charity towards the Russians. They thought that by doing that they would be able to change the Russians politically. The Germans did it, and they started doing it right back in the Cold War for cold, calculated reasons. It was the cheapest way of getting energy. There was no other reason than that. They did it for that reason and no other. And there's been endless attempts ever since the mid 2000s to find alternatives to Russian gas, and none have succeeded. I mean, there's the Nabucco pipeline to Azerbaijan. There were talk about, LNG has all previously been floated. There were pipelines to Algeria, pipelines from the Mediterranean. There's been all talks about alternative energies. None of them have made the kind of economic sense, the hard financial sense that Russian gas did.
Yeah. Danich says, do you see parallels between Britain in the 1920s, specifically around 1926, and the mood in the UK today? Is it close to social breakdown and political violence?
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison, because there is a very darkening mood in Britain today, as there was in the mid to late 1920s. But Britain in the mid to late 1920s, to be clear about this, was a much more politically stable and much more powerful state than it is today. First of all, it was still at the center of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. The British institutions worked extremely efficiently. And of course, on top of that, though, there was political problems. There was, there was strikes in the coal mines. There was even a general strike at one point. There was also political avenues for that disaffection to express itself. The Labour Party was rising. It was already winning around 30 to 40% of the votes in general elections, more than it is today, by the way. So there were political vehicles for that dissatisfaction to express itself. Political institutions worked. We had leaders like, people like Churchill and Attlee and all kinds of effective people were around. And Britain, politically and geopolitically, was extremely powerful and, frankly, also extremely rich. We're not in that position today.
Yeah, RC says Robert Barnes calling for Trump DeSantis 24. We did a great show on Infowars yesterday evening, our time yesterday evening with Robert. He was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Trump DeSantis 24.
Well, we'll see. Robert has a habit of getting these things right. We'll see.
Yeah. Commando Crossfire says, any chance the crisis in the EU could result in regime change in the Baltic states that could bring in rational governments? Do not see the Baltic states. Could Georgia begin to realign?
I think with Georgia,
denazify the Baltic states. Could Georgia begin to realign?
Yeah. I think Georgia, that's a possibility. I mean, it looks a very divided country at the moment, but and clearly the sort of the anti-Russian movement has a lot of traction. But one can see that the government, which also has clearly a lot of support, has been slowly shifting its position towards Russia and has refused to impose sanctions on Ukraine and on behalf of Ukraine and all of those things. I think the Baltic states are going to be a lot more difficult. And bear in mind that the Baltic states are in NATO and in the EU, and Georgia is not. And the fact that the Baltic states are in NATO and the EU gives the Western leaderships an enormous degree of leverage and say about what goes on in these countries and in their capitals.
All right. Marisa L., thank you for that super sticker. David S., thank you for that super sticker. Sharon says, Treaty of Shimonoseki. What happened to this treaty where Japan and Taiwan, after defeating China in 1895?
Well, I think that treaty was scrapped amongst all those other treaties at the end of the Second World War. It was superseded by the various treaties that replaced it, because of course it was a treaty that was made by the Japanese, if my memory serves me rightly, after the victorious Japanese defeated China in the War of 1898. And of course China was on the winning side of the Second World War, and I think all of those treaties were formally sacked. Some of these treaties, of course, were not. I mean, they may have been sacked, but they may have left a kind of lingering after effect. But do remember that at the end of the Second World War, when the government of China was still that of the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, Taiwan was reunited with China. And the reason Taiwan was separated again from China was because the Chinese government of that period, Chiang Kai-shek's government, the Kuomintang government, after being defeated by Mao Zedong and the communists, retreated to what they themselves considered to be Chinese territory, which was Taiwan.
Okay. Pathetic Albion says, there has been a huge amount of activity in Africa recently. Attempted coups, American deployments, Russian and Chinese diplomacy and investments, attacks on the UN forces, attacks on oil workers and gold mines. Any idea what's going on?
Well, there's clearly a major power game underway in Africa. more complicated than I understand, to be honest, because there's lots that, operate beneath the surface, and I'm not an African specialist. But it's clear that the African states are being wooed by the great powers, partly because of their importance in the General Assembly and the UN, and that is not to be underestimated, but also because of their enormous economic resources.
From Popey, thank you for that super sticker. From Talaton, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says climate data presented misleadingly or is altered.
As I said, we have to be so careful what we say on programs about this, which appear on YouTube. I hear that. I'm perfectly willing to believe it. I've made some very strong comments on this topic in my locals live streams. And no doubt we will be doing a program on this very topic eventually on one of those other platforms, on locals certainly.
All right. Mark Hewitt said, did Sunak sign the political death warrant with his reversal on VAT on energy?
I think he was already a dead man walking. That's my own personal view, in the sense that I think that for some time now, he's lost support amongst conservatives, as Conservative Party members. I think they increasingly saw him as a globalist, somebody they didn't really trust. And I think he was very effectively blamed for some of the economic problems that Britain is experiencing, with some cause, by the way. And I think the fact that he was involved in big money, that the stories about his tax, I think that was already starting to lose him support amongst Conservative Party members. I think his decision to come out against Johnson and to be the person who, in effect, made the resignation, which brought Johnson down, will have lost him support even more. And I think that Johnson loyalists, who are still influential, particularly in the grassroots of the Conservative Party, were already opposing him. So yes, I think this VAT reversal, which of course he denies is a reversal, has done him further harm. But I thought that Truss was likely to win even before this happened.
All right. Poggle Theliser, thank you for that super chat. Sammy295, thank you for that super sticker. Russell says, NAFTA gas deal is a fictitious purchase scam. Timoshenko's claim using Ukraine dollars and U.S. gas lend-lease dollars to buy gas at 2,300 MCM from phantom vendor put existing gas, probably stolen from Russia, on the books, pocket cash.
You've described it beautifully. For those who don't know, Ukraine about a week ago defaulted on its foreign debt. It's received minimal attention, but it did. It defaulted on its foreign debt, and it's clearly running out of foreign exchange. And Naftogaz, which is Ukraine's natural gas company, has now also defaulted because it's not receiving the money that it needs from the Ukrainian government to meet its external obligations. And Timoshenko has come up with this crazy plan, except of course it's not a crazy plan. It's a plan that will be make very great material sense to certain people in Ukraine. But she's come up with this plan, with this so-called lend-lease arrangement for Naftogaz, which we should not take seriously. That's another reason why I think they have to play up this idea that Ukraine is about to go on the offensive, because, of course, the economic situation in Ukraine is turning catastrophic.
No, you said Timoshenko. I think you meant the president of Ukraine. Timoshenko. Yeah, Timoshenko said the Naftogaz is up to no good. Yeah, but my question to you. But my question to you is.
I got them all mixed up.
Yeah, this is an even more important question to you is why? No, not why. What does this tell you about what's about to happen in Ukraine? The fact that they're now doing these types of interesting little side deals. And this is not a little one, by the way. It's like $4 billion. But what does this tell you?
Well, they're all preparing their bolt holes, so they know they're going to lose. Apparently, Zelensky even told a congressional delegation that Ukraine is slowly losing the war. apparently he said it straightforwardly. So they're now plundering everything they possibly can, and they're moving the money where they can. So when they all go abroad, well, they'll be well looked after.
What happens when you do a lend lease or a gas lend lease and everything collapses? I mean, who picks up the tab? Because it is a loan. At the end of the day, this is a loan.
Uncle Sam
picks
does.
it up?
Uncle Sam does, by which, of course, we mean American taxpayers. I mean, that's what lend lease is ultimately. I mean, if you're going to go down that particular route, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen myself. I mean, this is too crazy, even for Ukraine. But that's it seems to me what's going to happen.
Miklos says, I know politicians and corruption go hand in hand here, but thank God Orban is keeping us out of it for the most part.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
he is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kimberly, thank you for that super sticker. Urchinta, hola, from Texas, Urchinta. Thank you very much, Urchinta, for that super chat. Sanjeva, thank you for that super sticker. Let's see. Soberano, Brazil says, you guys make a lot of difference. Please keep it up. Thank you. Soberano. Az says, waiting for Duran merch. The expelled diplomat t-shirt is excellent. Can't wait to wear it in a work meeting and see the faces. LOL. Thanks. Thank you, Oz, for that. Angry Warhawk says, when do you think Saudi Arabia will break from the petrodollar?
That's a very good question. And can I just say that might be that might be the decisive thing. If Saudi Arabia joins the BRICS, and all the indications are that it's planning to, and if the BRICS launches a alternative reserve currency backed by a basket of BRICS currencies, then Saudi Arabia will presumably be a part of that reserve currency system. And presumably at that point, Saudi Arabia will demand payment for its oil in that currency. I mean, that seems to me the logic. Maybe that's why it wants to join the BRICS.
John says, why Lavrov didn't visit Eritrea in his African trip? Eritrea is the only country that voted in the Russian side.
I don't know. You must ask him. I mean, sorry. I mean, this is the kind of question I simply don't have an answer.
It probably wasn't on the itinerary. I mean,
I think it was not on the itinerary. I mean, he went to Ethiopia, but I mean, why he didn't go to Eritrea, I simply don't know.
I don't know. Patricia, thank you for that. Thank you for becoming a member of the Duran community. Az says, my favorite Duran joined late, so you may have discussed it. What is happening with the Russian 49th Army being cut off west of the Dnipro River? Yes.
The
famous encirclement of the Russian military.
This is the big story that you read about every day. I mean, the British media are full of this. That that the fact that the Ukrainians have punched holes in the Antonovsky Bridge across Kherson, across the Dnieper in Kherson city, that this has somehow cut off the Russian army west of the Dnieper River. Now, I have to say, I don't want to, first of all, understate the problems that punching holes in this bridge might have done. I don't want to make this look like it's a smaller story than it perhaps is, but I very much doubt. I very, very much doubt that those Russian troops across the Dnieper are not getting supplies. The bigger bridge, the railway bridge, is functioning, apparently, and the Ukrainians have essentially given up trying to destroy it because it's too heavily built. And the Russians, I am sure, have alternative means of getting supplies across. They probably are able to ferry supplies. And of course, the Russians are extremely advanced at doing that sort of thing. And of course, there's also talk that they're setting up pontoon bridges. I think we need to take a step back and wait and see what's happened, because there's a lot of wild claims appearing in the Western media. I would repeat something I've said elsewhere. I've never heard of a battle that was decided by the capture or fall of a single bridge. I think that this is people are looking more into this story than I think is probably there.
Yeah, well, they're promoting it for a reason. The collective West mainstream media. Yeah.
Well, I agree.
Poggle Thesliser says, good morning, guys. Given the slow progress. Oh, no. Did I just read that? No, I didn't. Good morning, guys. Given the slow progress of Russian forces, do you see a stalemate in the near future?
No, I don't think there's going to be a stalemate. I think, on the contrary, the tempo of events is going to start intensifying over the next few weeks. I think August will be the decisive month. I think that we've seen that the Russians have now cleared Lugansk. They seem to be making very significant progress in Donetsk. The word yesterday was that they've punched a hole through the densest part of the Ukrainian defense lines in Donetsk. And once Donbass is cleared, which I predict it will be this month, in August, then I think that you will see that the Russians are in a position to advance to the Dnieper, right across, right in central Ukraine, and perhaps to complete their preparations to capture other cities in the north. So I don't think that this is going slowly. I think, given the depth of the fortifications in Donbass, I think it's gone about as fast as it can.
Yeah. Medi1 says, question, do you think that BRICS itself could form its own type of UN and sanction the United States and maybe hold criminal hearings via their own committees? I believe the BRICS in the end is going to have that type of leverage when the Ukraine collapses, and China has been very vocal about holding people responsible.
Yes. First of all, there's no reason why they have to set up an alternative Ukraine to set up war crimes tribunals. I mean, they can do that themselves. They can set up war crimes tribunals to try people for war crimes. That's not a problem. And they can do that too. They can play that game if they choose to. Now, they're not going to set up an alternative UN because the Chinese and the Russians have made defense of the UN and of the UN system their most important ideological and political position in response to this rules-based international order that the Americans and the British have been sponsoring. They say, on the contrary, we are the defenders of international law. Russians and the Chinese say, we are the defenders of the international law and of the UN system. It is the Americans and the British who are undermining it. So given that that is their position, I don't think or see that they would want to destroy the UN or pull out of the UN and try to replace it with something else. I think what they would say is, we want to make the UN work, but not in the way that the British and the Americans have tried to make it work in their own interests. We want to see it based on sovereign states, anchored in international law. We don't want it twisted to serve a kind of globalist cause. That is the major legal, geo-legal argument that's going on between the two sides at the moment.
Gregory Nicholson says, Alex and Alex, for climate change perspective, see the work of Dr. Zarkova and Grand Solar Minimum 2020-2053. Previous GSMs cooled 1.5. Celsius WEF timeline pushed. Thank you very much for that, Gregory. We will check that out. Denitsa Ivanova says, I'm curious, how bad is the self-censorship in Western Europe? According to a friend of mine, in Germany, the situation is pretty awful.
It is awful. The level of self-censorship is incredible. I mean, just look. I mean, just consider this. I mean, we have been careful what we've said, even on this live stream, and nobody can accuse us of willingly self-censoring ourselves. We have to be very careful sometimes what we say, but other people, of course, and this is really very, very much more dangerous. They self-censor because they want to. And across mainstream media, they know what's going on. They know the real events in Ukraine. They're getting lots of information about it, but they don't want to talk about it because obviously they want to project a particular narrative. It's all about narrative construction. And that's the dominant position in the West. In Europe, it's terrible. In the US, it's extremely bad, not quite as bad as in Europe.
Manchester says, what do you think will happen in Britain regarding January when energy further increases in price?
This is a very good question. I mean, we're having more and more strikes going on across Britain. I think Alan Watson, who's one of our regulars and who lives in Britain, is British, says that he thinks there's a huge political crisis coming in Britain. And I agree. I think we could be looking at events that might in some way parallel, at the very least, the political crisis at the beginning of the 20th century, which led to the emergence of the Labour Party. But that's probably saying the least of it, actually. I think a wave of strikes, a wave of protests, and eventually there's inevitably going to be a concerted challenge against the political class, which they will respond to in a very ruthless way.
Yeah. Taro Man Harris, thank you for that super sticker. VUF Berlik says, regarding the CO2 request, ask Ben Davidson, suspicious observers. I take it that's his channel, suspicious observers.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for that. And Stuart says, what is the state of Greece's relationship? What is the state of Greece's relations with Iran?
Oh, that's a very good question. I as far as I know, I mean, Alex perhaps can flesh this out, but as far as I know, Greece basically follows where the US leads. So I don't doubt that we are particularly.
It's never been bad in the past.
It's never been bad, exactly.
But now we've always had it's strained because of the tanker thing.
Strained. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's never been an issue,
I mean,
but now
certainly if you're talking about how Greek people feel about Iran, and there's no hostility there. It's not a big issue, I have to say. It's not been a big issue in Greece.
This tanker thing was what soured it, and for no reason. Yeah. What did Greece gain from it? Nothing.
Well, nothing.
They were stealing a tanker at the behest of the U.S.
Yeah.
Greece got nothing out of it.
Yeah.
Horse and carte blanche. In response to the Supreme Court ruling, New Jersey and California are passing laws that prevent private citizens to be able to sue gun manufacturers if a gun they produced gets used in a crime. How clownish.
Okay. I think this is something we should discuss more fully, actually. Again, I think Robert Barnes is probably the person to discuss all of this. I mean, that does sound extraordinary, but we'd need to know more.
Yeah. Stephen Collins, thank you for joining the Duran community. Jim, thank you for joining the Duran community. Poggle the Lesser says the U.S. will meet the same fate as Yugoslavia.
Oh, I certainly hope not. I mean, I would be very, very sorry if it. I mean, I was very sorry when Yugoslavia broke up. I mean, I was being a country that I knew well, but I would be deeply, deeply horrified and very, very frightened if we saw anything like that happen in the US. I mean, bear in mind, Yugoslavia had no nuclear weapons. The US does. So I hope we don't see anything like that. And on balance, I think not. I think Americans do continue to remain attached to the United States. But, well, we'll see.
Yeah. Blackhead Atta, thank you for that super chat. Frank O'Reilly, thank you for that super chat. Mr. Tom Flan says, with the Ukrainians wasting so many resources on Donbass and Kherson counteroffenses, quote, would a Russian move on Kharkov be easier than, say, Mariupol?
There is a huge amount of internet chatter. This is pure gossip. I can't say whether or not it's true that the Russians are preparing a strike from the north. Now, that could be Kharkov, but it could also be further west towards places like Chernigov and Sumy and even Kiev. Now, there's a huge amount of internet chatter about this. I don't know, but quite possibly they're making exactly the kind of assessments and deductions that you're making.
All right. Taro Man Harris, thank you. Welcome to the Duran community, Taro Man Harris. And Ace Blue Note, welcome to the Duran community. Marisa L says, for Alex's superb Trudeau impersonation just now, thank you for that. Zahir, thank you for that super chat. Jungle Jin says, Lech Walesa arose from the crypt calling for reducing the population of Russia to 50 million. Wait for another Nobel Peace Prize nomination.
Absolutely. Now, a few years ago, I remember that he was calling for improving relations with Russia. So he's obviously gone now to the other extreme. I thought that was an appalling thing to say. I mean, I really thought that was shocking. And I mean, it very disturbing. And, well, I'm going to say this. I used to support Solidarity in the 1980s. I actually raised money for them. I was a student at that time, so I used to go on fundraisers and things like that. It was very much my cause. I never particularly liked Valenza. There were other people in Solidarność, and I knew quite a few people from Poland who, at that time, who were part of the Solidarność. They were telling me, that they didn't particularly like Valenza either, and so I'm afraid I'm not completely surprised that he's talked in this way, but I still find that deeply shocking and astonishing again that it's not been commented about in the West, that it's not been criticized as it should be.
Sparky says, is there a heated Greek-Iranian yogurt rivalry? Well said. Well said, Sparky. RDDR says, why is the liberal international order failing?
Because, well, I'll tell you one thing. If you're talking about classical liberalism, it's not. It's a deeply corrupted and very ugly liberalism, a neoliberalism, which is unbelievably controlling. I mean, classical liberals, Voltaire-type liberals used to say, I don't care what your opinion is. I may disagree with you completely, but I'll fight to the death for your right to hold it. Well, that's the opposite of liberals today. It's the opposite of progressives today. And why is it failing? Because it's all about control. At the end of the day, it's all about controlling people, reordering their lives, manipulating of people, engaging in manipulations in terms of political intrigues and electoral intrigues. And it's ugly. It's deeply unattractive. People don't want to live like that. They don't like the sort of messages on identities that, the liberals have trying to push on them. Also, by the way, in my opinion, as mechanisms of control and of division. And that's why there's a reaction.
All right. Chris Cannon, welcome to Duran Community. Zahir, thank you for that super chat. Ye Old Bandicoot, thank you for that awesome super chat. Good day from the Outback in Australia. You are my go-to news for all macro discussions regarding Eastern Europe, starting with Saker of the Vineyard and now the Duran and others you have recommended. Keep it coming, guys. Thank you very much.
Well, we are. We're working very hard.
Absolutely. Peter, welcome to the Duran Community. Ace Blue Note, thank you for that awesome super chat. Darren says, who do you think will replace Stoltenberg after he steps down? Any chance for a saner head, or will they try to turn their heading to targeting China? Well, Boris Johnson, according to the Telegraph.
This is real, by the way. I mean, there is a major push on the part of some people in Britain to push Boris Johnson as the next NATO Secretary General. And apparently it's getting some backing from the US. So don't discount it. It could happen. The French are said to be opposed. And Macron and Johnson, who briefly, back in 2019, seemed the best of friends, have now fallen out with each other very, very much. And it seems that Macron will probably veto it. But it's not impossible. Don't expect a saner head. No head of NATO is ever sane. They're all the same as Stoltenberg. It'll be Stoltenberg Mark II, and the person who succeeds that person will be Stoltenberg like Mark III. Just as Stoltenberg was just the same as Rasmussen, like all the other NATO Secretary Generals I can remember. And of course, Boris Johnson would be even worse.
Yeah. Trump DeSantis 2024 sounds great, but if Trump doesn't choose his advisors carefully, it could be a disaster and ruin DeSantis' chances after Trump. I worry he's out of touch like most of the American people. I completely agree. Trump has, if Trump gets into office, he has got to choose his advisors much more carefully than his first time around.
Absolutely. I mean, completely true. Now, one has to say this. I mean, DeSantis has a lot more political nous than Trump did when he became president back in 2017. And of course, DeSantis ideologically is much closer to Trump than Pence was. That's putting it mildly. So he might be able to give Trump some advice on how to find picks.
Yeah, and won't you say that DeSantis would be a much more active, hands-on vice president than Pence?
I would have thought so. Thought so.
Summer of 1970, thank you for that super sticker. Nick says, I find it strange how Russia is still considered a junior player by Western politicians, e.g. Tony Blair, Has Russia not shown the strength of their military, economy, and the need for their commodities?
Well, indeed, absolutely. But of course, facing up to that reality, acknowledging its truth, would mean recognizing that all the things that you thought about Russia have turned out to be completely wrong for the last 30 years, or at least especially the last 20 years. And that's a very difficult thing for people psychologically to do. So, you come up with all kinds of things. You say, there's going to be an offensive in Kherson region. The Russian army is going to collapse. It's running out of men. It's running out of missiles. Its foreign reserves are becoming depleted. Its currency is about to crash. Its economy is about to crash. It's going to run out of semiconductors. You tell yourself all of these things because it's more easy to do that than to face up to the fact that you've been wrong.
They're coping.
They're coping.
Yeah. Coping mechanisms. Yeah. Roman says, thanks for the great streams and analytics, gentlemen. Have you heard about Girkin Strelkov? To be objective, good, to discuss Russian mistakes, and to do options. Strelkov, Girkin, yes, I have.
Oh, well, of course, I mean anybody who's followed the wars and conflicts in Ukraine knows all about him. I mean, he was the seminal personality in the 2014 fighting. And I mean, there wouldn't have been a conflict in Donbass had he not been involved. And of course, he's a very interesting commentator today, but he does have his own perspective and point of view. I wouldn't say it was objective, but I would say it's certainly interesting and one that you must always attend to.
RDDR says, is the return to great power conflict regression?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think the fundamental fallacy of the last 20, 30 years is that it ever really went away. The United States had a brief period when it looked like it was the most powerful, well, it was the most powerful country by far. The Soviet Union collapsed. China was rising, but it wasn't strong. But it was inevitable that sooner or later new power centers would emerge that would challenge the US. It happens. That's history. I mean, even Rome had, the Persian Empire and then the German tribes. I mean, nothing is ever forever. So it's not regression. It's just the normal course of history. Now, the point was, if you look back to previous periods of so-called great power competition, they've also been combined with great power cooperation, and they can create very stable geopolitical systems. They did so for a time in the 19th century after the Napoleonic Wars. The Cold War was also a very stable time politically. I know there are some people who think it wasn't really a Cold War at all, that it was actually a long peace between the great powers. And so if we get back to a kind of sense of balance, the kind of classical diplomacy, it might not be a regression. It might even be progress. And it would be better for the US as well.
Angry Warhawk says, did we answer this? When do you think Saudi Arabia will break from the petrodollar? I think we answered this, yes. Yeah. Well, another shout out to Angry Warhawk. Let's see here. TCH5802, Draghi quit so that Salvini or similar with much more goodwill in Moscow can blame it all on the crazy old guy and the crazies in Berlin, like in 1943.
There's some truth in that. I think mainly the reason Draghi quit was in order to preserve his own reputation. He's going before the shit hits the fan, as they say. He doesn't want to be there and spattered with it. That's all it is, in my opinion.
Yes.
By the way, I think he's a very, very overrated figure. I think he's a really awful man, my personal view, and I don't think there's more to be said about him.
An unelected prime minister. Miss Texas G says, could you give an analysis as to what are the real world outcomes of the U.S. Congress declaring Russia a sponsor of terrorism, state sponsor of terrorism?
I think it's going to make negotiations between the Russians and the Americans all but impossible. I mean, disastrous idea. I suspect we're going to see it happen.
Let's see. From Andy King. I've been an avid follower of your channel for more than a couple of years. I really like it's a long message. I really like your realistic perspective on current affairs. we are holidaying we're Lithuanians living in the UK, and we are holidaying in the Baltic Sea. And I can see a picture that I have never seen before. There are more than 10 LNG tankers queuing up at the LTU Klaipėda LNG terminal, with scores of Ukrainian Lithuanian tanker trucks leaving Klaipėda. My question is it possible that they are trying to fill their storages using these small LNG trucks? It's a drop in the ocean, or they are specifically bound to Ukraine, but then they still are getting some gas via the existing pipes.
Yeah, I think this is obviously what's going on, and there's a huge amount about this. I mean, I think partly the Baltic states need LNG now desperately because they've cut themselves off from Russian pipeline gas, and they're hoping that the LNG from Klaipėda will make the difference. And I think a lot of it is going to Ukraine. By the way, there is now reverse flow across the Yamal pipeline. This is the pipeline that's one of the pipelines that sends gas from Russia to Germany, separate from Nord Stream 1. Apparently, it's now reverse flow from Germany to Poland. And the Russians have said they think some of that gas is actually going to Ukraine as well.
Didn't the Russians say if they do that, they're going to cut things off real quick?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reverse flow has happened, and they are, as we see, they are dialing things down. The point is, LNG, I think it's now become absolutely clear. There isn't enough of it to replace pipeline gas, and it's more expensive. And, you can load it on trucks, but you can't load as much gas on trucks as you can if you send it via pipeline. And it's not energy efficient, because think about it. Those trucks, how do they move? They move on diesel. So you're using one fossil fuel to move around another. Whereas if you get them going through pipelines, it's much, much easier. It's much, much cheaper. It's much more cost effective, and it's much more fuel efficient. But that's the world we're in.
So ridiculous. It is so ridiculous, isn't it?
It's completely ridiculous.
It's like I've got the supermarket right next door, but I'm going to go out to the forest and go hunting for food.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just crazy, man. Oh boy. Commando Crossfire says, would Russia intervene against Israel in the case of an attack on Iran? Would the Saudis or the U.S. join in with Israel? And how would Syria fit in?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that the Russians would directly involve themselves in a war between Israel and Iran. But I think they will do everything they possibly can to try and prevent it happening. And they're having some very tough talks with the Israelis at the moment. They even launched a warning shot, apparently, at an Israeli fighter jets in Syria recently. So I think that the Russians want to avoid a war between Israel and Iran. They're doing everything they can to prevent it. They're telling the Israelis don't do it. And if it does happen, I think they will quietly back Iran. I think they won't take a public stance. I don't know that they will supply Iran with weapons, but I suspect they will provide Iran with some information, some economic support, and perhaps even a certain amount of intelligence.
From Matt Tim, Alexander, why do you think Siversk is taking longer than thought? I heard Ukrainians set up dozens of mines on the way into the city.
No, I think there's actually been a different reason, and I think it's a perhaps more realistic reason. It's one that I've seen a number of, I think, pretty good commentators say, which is that the Russians could have captured Siversk some time ago, but that it didn't suit them, because their major focus was in fighting further south in places like Bakhmut, Soledar, and at the Uglegorsk power station. And keeping the sort of fighting going at a certain level in Siversk meant that the Ukrainians were overextended, that they were keeping troops close to Siversk as opposed to just withdrawing them south, which they would have done if the Russians had just moved into Siversk. Now, I'm not a tactician, a military tactician, or any of that sort of thing, but I think that's probably the reason behind it.
Right. JF, thank you for that super sticker. Liana LK says, met in London with bankers and marketing execs. They are absolutely convinced that Russia is losing on all fronts. Ukraine will win and no harm to UK, EU, US from the sanctions. Their sheer arrogance and ignorance was astounding. Liana, I just want to say that I've actually met with various banker money, Wall Street type of guys the past month. The same exact attitude, Alexander.
Yeah.
They are convinced 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, that Russia is collapsing.
Yes, I know.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, well, it's what they're wired to think.
Yeah. Let's see. JF, thank you for that super sticker. Soberano Brazil says, do you think there will be a campaign against BRICS, a strong one, maybe sanctions?
Yeah, I think inevitably there will be at some point. If there's a clash between China and the US, or some kind of clash over Taiwan, then we're going to see sanctions, and they'll be gradually extended to encompass the whole of the BRICS. And then India will have to make a decision which side of the fence it's on. But I think that's quite possible.
Summer of 1970 says, good day, everybody, and thank you for joining the Drag community. Summer of 1970. Icarus says, what's the future of the Greek economy for the foreseeable future? Thank you from Athens.
Bad, in a word. Alex, you're there. Perhaps you can tell us.
Bad. I mean, well, I'll give you the question. When Germany collapses, what happens to Greece? The EU, Germany. When all of that house of cards collapses, where is Greece left to go?
Exactly. I mean, we're in a terrible mess. We've played our cards disastrously badly, and we have a political class which is both selfish and self-interested, and which is desperate to remain part of the club, the Euro-Atlantic club.
Yeah. Think Help says, but resist we much. We must and we will much about that be committed. Thank you for that. Think Help. J. James, Edwards Gonzalez, thank you for that super sticker. Oh, thank you for that super sticker. So Badano Brazil says, South America is not very strong militarily speaking. People are worried the USA will drain our resources even more. Hybrid war.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Nonetheless, it's interesting that the drift in politics in South America is the way it is. And I would have thought this would be a concerning thing for some people in the US. Yeah. Especially if the Russians or the Chinese increase their footprint there.
Yes. Andres says, how long will it take for Bulgaria and Romania to rebuild their military gear? And who is going to pay for their gifts for Ukraine?
Right. The short answer on the second is Uncle Sam again. That's what that $40 billion package was all about. American taxpayers are going to be paying to provide weapon systems to Bulgaria and Romania. Of course, it will then go through the system. All sorts of people will take their cuts. And of course, a lot of it will end up with the MIC. But it's a beautiful laundry, which provides the MIC the biggest beneficiaries of it. And that's what that's a lot of what this is all about. Make no mistake of it. How long will it take? As long as the the profits continue to be made.
The longer the better for them.
The longer
for them, the longer the better.
The better, yeah.
Exactly. And the American taxpayer is going to be on the hook.
No.
Ben Redward says, fantastic work, gentlemen. Can you please announce on Telegram your appearances on other podcasts? I hate missing them or only finding them later by accident. Thank you so much. You are absolutely right, Ben. I always forget to announce our appearances on other podcasts, on other platforms as well. So I will definitely keep that in mind. Thank you, Ben, for that. Lord Justicos says, the elephant in the room is, wait for it, will the Russians get involved if there is a nuclear conflict in the Pacific between China and the U.S.?
Well, that's true. I mean, that is the elephant in the room. And that there are, I'm sure, all sorts of agreements and understandings between the Chinese and the Russians about this, which we simply don't know about.
From George Schaefer, I continue to be amazed at your command of current events blended with historical and economic context and international legal considerations. You guys are my primary source of news. GTS.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words.
Thank you very much, George, for that. William Sasanto says, isn't today's Kissinger's 2-month deadline?
Yeah,
That's
I
true.
think you may be right. Yeah, I think it probably is true.
Good point.
Well, there we go. It's the window is closing, and we will see that in some ways he was prescient, because of course the Russians are now making clear signals that the time for negotiations is passing.
Yeah. Maureen says, what happened to Pelosi's trip to Taiwan?
As far as I know, it's still on. I mean, whether it will happen, of course, is another matter. But you see,
Tankers
now
moving into
it's
position.
become, now, of course, also, I mean, it's become a political topic within the US itself. So if it's called off, the Republicans will make hay of it. I mean, it's terrible. Alex made the point over the course of our live stream, our program yesterday on InfoWars, that if you're a skilled leader, you see the bumps in the road ahead, you drive around them, you know that you don't send someone like Pelosi to Taiwan at this particular time. You don't need to do it. There's no need to create yourself to do this thing. And a far-sighted leader can see that this is going to create nothing but problems. But, they went ahead and did it anyway.
Hiram, thank you for that super chat. Alexander says, will there be political crisis in the US?
Yes, I think there is already a political crisis in the US when you have a president who's clearly incapable of exercising his duties properly, an administration that is so chaotic and which is always drifting into confrontations with, two nuclear superpowers. And when you see all these steps being taken in the US to try to control things within the US as well, there can be no doubt at all. We are in a political crisis in the US already, and it's going to get worse.
All right. Trigger Happy, thank you for that super sticker. Hiram says, stalled Russian forces have reached Germany, with an upside down emoji. Thank you very much for that. Sam Whiskey says, Ethiopians want to volunteer to fight for Russia.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Cranberg says, Alex, check out FIDE. It's a treasure trove of Clown Worlds, the upcoming title match. The FIDE president and G. Kasparov is comedy gold.
Oh, this is the chess federation. Indeed, I've heard about this too. Actually, I would, I'd love to find out more about it.
Kasparov, what happened to that guy?
No.
Jungle Jin says, does Schwab own the world's climate scientists, including the IPCC? Are these scientists all frauds? If not, what is with climate change skepticism?
I don't think they're all frauds, but I think that a lot of this science does go where the money goes. Let's put it like that. And I think and the money is all going in one direction. And Mr. Schwab, no doubt, has his part to play in it. I think that's all I could say.
Yes. Sterile Neutrino, thank you for that super chat. Pope Rackets says, bright side, Biden set world record for beating cancer, and his nonprofit set record with the best results with minimal spending, and research Fauci helped with funding.
Absolutely. I mean, we must be inspired by all of this.
Redefine recession. Just redefine it. It goes away, right? And thank you for that super chat. Summer of 1970 says, neoliberal controlled California is the fifth largest economy in the world, and yet we have no health care. It's truly disgraceful. Yeah. That is disgraceful.
Yeah.
I agree with you. 40 billion to Ukraine, Alexander, but no health care.
Well, indeed, yeah.
Paul, thank you for that super chat. Jennifer Chang says, Nobel Peace Awards are a total joke, especially Obama. The prize should be recalled. The Vogue cover, First Lady of Ukraine is very sick. They don't take people's lives seriously. Speechless.
Yeah, I agree.
An angry emoji. I agree. That Vogue shoot was... It
was a disastrous sight. It left me speechless as well.
And then they went on to Piers Morgan the next day.
I know, yeah.
Incredible. Zionic, thank you for that super sticker. IDK, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says, Nixon was lampooned for failure of price controls. Now the establishment points to them as a success. Price controls without rationing don't work.
Absolutely correct. That's entirely right. Price controls and rationing go together. But even price controls and rationing, I'll tell you what they do. They breed, sometimes, in wartime, you can see the rationale for them. But in other time periods, even in wartime, what they create is a black market. Inevitably, it's an iron law. You will find people who will look for where demand is greatest, who manage to hoard supplies, and who pass on supplies illegally. In other words, they foster corruption.
Yeah. V. Van Dezer says, just love your show. Thank you very much for that, V. Van Dezer. And let's see. Chester Brooks says, the problem is that politicians are corrupt, paid employees of the oligarchs, simply put. And Miss Texas says, Russia is collapsing. How much under the bed with your eyes closed do you have to be? Well said.
Well, but it's very true. But what Alex said, by the way, I mean, I've encountered the same thing. I mean, all of us have. I mean, people just don't want to see it, and of course, when you are the most blind, are those who will not see. I think it was Jesus who said this, but it's true.
If a society does not care for people's health or education, it is not a society. Hunter-gatherers had figured out that much.
True.
Yeah. Let's see. Which is worse, Zelensky and his wife or Harry and Meghan?
Zelensky and his wife. I say that because they can actually, do harm. Harry and Meghan can
Good point.
They're only there for laughs. The laughs, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Good point. Nina Jurovic says, why are the British in particular so anti-Russian and anti-Putin? Thank you for all your great work. Your reporting and analysis has been a godsend.
I've asked this question myself. I find it very difficult to come up with a clear answer. I mean, it's very difficult to explain. I will say that it's concentrated amongst the upper, the elite type of people. But why they have this visceral attitude to Russia, which is, I mean, anti-Putinism is just one aspect of it. I just don't know. There's historical reasons. There's also, I think, incredible resentment that Russia remains a great power and Britain no longer is. So there's that factor as well. There's also, I think, a deep resentment that Russia somehow avoided being carved up and, looted by many of the people who you will find in Britain. But why it's so deep, why it's so widespread, why it's so powerful, ultimately, I can't fully explain it.
Yeah. Pasha says, my Ukrainian friends are too close to the action. I fear to be able to see the truth.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah. Liana says, breaking news from Sky, fears of the U.S. going into recession as economy contracts for a second consecutive quarter. Boy, we are in for a ride, and I work in finance. We are
fears,
fears
about U.S. going into recession. Why not simply straightforwardly say the U.S. is in recession? Why pretend that why only be afraid that it may go into recession when we all know that it already is?
It's all about media spin and it's just living in a fictitious world.
Exactly.
Yeah. Michael Hall says, at what point do we call us a genocide from the West or from the incompetent Zelensky? If you know you're not going to be able to win a war and you're not willing to negotiate, and both are true.
I avoid the genocide words, and for very good legal reasons. But to be very clear, if things begin to get really bad, some very terrible things might happen, and we might indeed see them.
Poggle the Lesser, 1977, says the long or new peace ended on February 24th.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Sparky says Trump should choose Lieutenant Colonel Alan West as his running mate. Florida is too populous and too important at this point to lose DeSantis. Interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
AICI says a possible resurgence in unionist thought across the Eastern EU. Czech, Slovakia, Bulgaria, NM with this recession where there was velvet divorce.
I think that the EU centre would be opposed, to say it straightforwardly. I think they would not like it. And I think that you would find a lot of opposition from some of the political classes in these countries as well. So for the moment, I don't think it's going to happen. If the EU were to break down, then it might be a different story.
Zariel says, thank you, gentlemen, as always, for everything. Any news on Julian? Thank you, Zariel, and thank you for moderating.
Any news on
Zariel.
Julian? Yeah, I mean, there's been the appeal, I understand, has now been lodged, or is in the process of being lodged, against this latest decision to extradite him. It's a dual appeal against Priti Patel's decision to send him to the US and against the substantive decision of Judge Baritza on every other aspect of the Westminster County Crown Magistrates Court, which said that, you know, the US was entitled to have Assange. She only refused to extradite him on health grounds. So this appeal has now been lodged. I understand the High Court has given an extension of time. So we probably have a full year of very difficult litigation ahead. And in the meantime, Assange remains in Belmarsh. It's very, very, very sad. Very terrible, actually. No, it's not sad, it's tragic and terrible.
Yeah. Reza says, gentlemen, what are your thoughts on Macron hosting MBS today? Thank you.
Well, Macron trying, I think, his piece of diplomacy. Why does he think he can succeed where Biden failed?
Yeah. Agreed. Dularch says, is this 15% voluntary emergency energy rationing a method to gain permanent control by the EU over Europe's energy? And is the food the next target?
Yes, is the answer to that. And I've been saying this for ages. One of the untold, unspoken facts about this Ukraine conflict is that we've seen over the course of it a massive increase in power and reach for the Commission. They've been able to control air policy, you know, imposing airline bans and closing airspace. They've been able now to, and they've now extended their reach to energy policies as well. They're going to be, and of course, this is a voluntary agreement. They're going to start demanding that it may be made binding, and they're going to start insisting that they regulate how much energy each EU country can use. And yes, that is exactly what this is all about.
Yeah. Olaf says, lamestream media is reporting that the USA officially is in recession, GDP down 0.9% in Q2 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chimp in a bow tie says, if you want to do climate change properly, just interview Tony Heller. His videos going back a decade explore the climate hoax in the simplest terms.
Right. Okay, we will.
We got a lot of.
By the way, just going back to
the.
Indeed. By the way, just going back to the GDP, do you remember how, you know, a year and a bit ago, Biden's administration was going to turbocharge the US into stellar growth rates?
Yeah, he turbocharged it all right.
Absolutely. How did it all turn
out? Pasha says Macron might, in theory, succeed where Biden failed because Macron is cogent. It's true. Can't argue with that, Pasha. Reza says, gentlemen, truly appreciate your hard work and dedication in keeping us updated on current events to include brilliant, smart analysis. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Reza, for that awesome super chat. Thank you very much, Reza. Ryan says, morning, gents. No one should be surprised by the insanity gaslighting by the globalist elites. These are people who change the definition of medical terms to fit a narrative, just like they now change economic definitions.
Yes. Yeah.
Rufus says, honest question, are the majority of Western leaders incompetent, ignorant, corrupt, or a combination of all three? This conflict with Russia is lunacy.
A combination of all three.
Yeah.
Simple. I mean, it's a simple answer to a good question.
Yeah. Where are we here? RD Doctor says, did Westerners get more closed-minded in the 2010s?
I think perhaps yes. I mean, I think the control mechanisms really began to get very powerful. But I think if you really want to look at the time period when there was this closing up, it's the Clinton years. It's the 1990s. That was when the decisive steps were taken that created the system that we have today in the West.
All right. April Bista, thank you for that super sticker. Oz Oz is testing my Russian. This is a Russian message. Alex, a kde ty vyučil ruský jazyk? Where did I learn Russian? Oz Oz. I lived in Moscow, and I have taken and actually do still take Russian lessons. So my goal is to learn Russian and speak it perfectly. That is my goal. David March, because it's an important language, and I enjoy it. David March says, this is the Peloponnesian War. We are the Delphi League. Also, Putin is the Russian Ataturk.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand. I think all very, very good points about Putin being the Russian Ataturk, about gathering together the Russian lands and being essentially about Russia, not about the Soviet reconstituting the Soviet Union. I think that is true.
Yeah. Eva says, keep it up. Thank you very much, Eva. James, thank you for that super chat. Sterile Neutrino says, after anti-diplomacy in Eastern Europe, like it's 1914, the UK is now talking about sleepwalking into nuclear war with China. Madness. The empire got beaten raw, even by small Japan during World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Britain doing all these things, it is absolute madness. I come back to what I said. One of the most depressing moments I've ever had was watching the British House of Commons debate the Afghan withdrawal and the collapse in Afghanistan, as if what the British thought about it mattered. And that we talk in this way, and we talk fool ourselves like this is deeply distressing to me as a British person.
Yep. Sanjeva says, Alexander Alex, you have to tell us a funny anecdote that you heard or experienced to lighten the mood. I am sure you have a wealth of such anecdotes. I want to laugh before I go to sleep, please.
Alex, you're better at this than me.
Sanjeva, my friend, I've got nothing.
Nor have I at the moment, but I'll think of something, no doubt.
Just I don't know. Let me see here. No, I don't have anything. Oh, did you see Aristovich's statement? I've got one for you, Sanjev. I've got one for you. Let me pull it up. Wait. So Aristovich, Alexander, was on some TV show in Ukraine. Aristovich, if people don't know, he is like the spokesperson. He's like Zelensky's right-hand guy, you would say, right?
No.
Okay. No. So Aristovich was on a Ukraine TV show. And listen to the quote that he gave. I haven't confirmed this 100%, by the way. But this is what he said during this show. And I quote, "The Russians are advancing because they simply don't know what to do. They don't have a defense strategy."
I think he did say that. I've heard that too. But yeah,
they're winning the war because they just don't know what to do.
Yes.
All right. So that's what I've got, Sanjeva. Yeah. Let's see. From Su Yilin, thank you for that super chat, Sui Yilin. From Moonbeams, you two are better together. The separate videos are good, but the sum of the parts are not greater than the whole. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. We both agree.
Yes. Moonbeams, thank you very much for that. Maureen says, to buy Toyota trucks in the U.S., you're waitlisted, and dealers adding anywhere between $5,000 and up to $30,000 over MSRP to make up for losses due to no inventory and supply chain. Wow.
Wow. Crumbs.
Up to 30,000. That's crazy. Edward Bernays says the U.S. dollar hegemony and geopolitical interventions will end immediately when China and the BRICS refuse payment in dollars for their resources and produce and demand renminbi. Over what period of time do you estimate this process will happen?
Could happen very fast. I don't think it'll be RMB. That's Chinese currency. I think it's more likely to be this reserve currency that the Russians and the Chinese have confirmed the BRICS countries are discussing with each other.
All right. Antar Das says, as a member of the U.S. military, it's infuriating to see the Russians get a hold of our systems. The deep state keeps the war machine rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, why? For what purpose?
Everyone knows they're going to sell these systems. They're going to be Ukrainian military personnel and politicians who are going to sell a part of these systems. I mean, everyone knows that.
Yeah.
So why keep on giving it to them
Absolutely.
anyway? Zishan, thank you for that super sticker. Roy Wickinson says the Ghost of Kiev aircraft model is 100% realistic. I opened the box and there was nothing in it. Oh boy. Iris,
well, there you go.
said,
You wanted some jokes. You're getting some very good ones from
you're
members
some
of the
good
community.
ones. Yeah. Iris Enamorado says, how many languages do both of you speak?
I speak English and Greek and a little French.
English, Greek, Spanish, and now Russian soon, hopefully. Let's see. Mark Hewitt says, if Truss does become PM, there is a rumor that she will make John Redwood chancellor. He would be the first chancellor since Brown in charge of Treasury, not the other way around.
That's interesting. Now, that will be bringing back someone from the Thatcher years. He must be quite, advanced in years by now. Not a reason why not to appoint him, I suppose. But anyway, I hadn't heard that one. I'd be very interested to see if it happens.
Yeah. Command Unit said Putin
is he even in the House of Commons? Is he even in the House of Commons? I wonder. Anyway, never mind.
I don't know. Chat, is he in the House of Commons? I'm sure someone will answer. Command Unit says Putin has unleashed the Russian budget and has allowed the government to spend. The recession in the West and possibly the rest of the world will cause the fall of the price of oil, but they can devalue the ruble in that case.
Well, I think that devalue. I think what you mean by that is that they will allow the ruble to lose value, to track, in other words, the oil price downward, which is what they've done in the past. I don't think it would mean a devaluation of the ruble internally. I think they'd be very anxious to prevent inflationary forces taking hold back in Russia again. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the Russians have been handling this. The sanctions blow effectively, and I think they will continue to.
Yeah. SK says Pelosi's trip to start another laundromat. Well said. Michael Litster, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky says Nixon was lampooned for failure of price controls. Now the establishment points to them as success. Price controls without rationing don't work.
Yeah. I think we discussed this.
I think we discussed that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Falvey Pollard says, "Why aren't the Russians fully mobilizing to try and win quickly? They seem to be losing a lot of men and equipment as they advance." I haven't heard. I'm hearing exactly. As far as losing men and equipment.
No, this is what the media in the West and governments in the West and intelligence agencies are saying. I mean, the U.S. Intelligence community has just briefed Congress that the Russians have had 70,000 casualties, and Peskov, who's Putin's spokesman, said this is fake news. Yeah, so I have to say that's also my impression. I don't think they've been experiencing very heavy losses, or at least nothing on anything like the scale people say.
I mean, my question to you, Alexander, if they had lost 70,000 lives, would they be holding drills in the east of Russia, the Vostok drills?
Well, exactly. I mean, they're not fully mobilizing because they're winning the war with what they've deployed. So why would they need to mobilize?
Yeah. Uncle Vanya says Boris to replace Zelensky. There's a petition in the Ukraine, I believe, for Boris to actually replace Zelensky. Have you heard about that?
No, I haven't.
It's got like a couple thousand signatures too. Let's see. Andres Berzin says we need a monthly stream on the channel titled Clown World with Alex and Alexander. The news has become one big clown world, that is for sure.
Absolutely, it has. Absolutely.
It's hard to distinguish anymore. Let's see here. From, I lost my place. Zukzuksi, thank you for that super sticker. Michael, thank you for that super sticker. Natalia, thank you for that super sticker. Herding Cat says, you gentlemen are literally the A-team. Alex, Justin says hello. Hello to you, Justin. Liana says, no, that was the breaking news from Liana with Sky News about the fear of recession. We did that. Patricia says, governments paid scientists say climate change is our fault. Independent scientists say otherwise. I've been through all their scare tactics the last 50 years.
Yeah, I was just we will. I think we will do a program on this, and I think it will be a good program actually.
Yeah. Jim Udling says the mention of healthcare this week. I took a friend for an exam. The X-ray tech had just returned from her native Belarus for eye surgery for $300. That would cost her thousands here in California.
Right. Gosh. It's the same. It's the same, by the way, in Britain. Despite the fact that we have a national health service, which you hear so much about, there's certain treatments that are only privately available, and they cost an enormous amount in Britain, and you can do them in Eastern Europe and in Belarus for much less.
Yeah,
I know one person who's had a treatment in Belarus, very good treatment, and for a fraction of what it would be here.
Yeah. Rufus says, can Russia ever achieve peace in Ukraine while the Zelensky regime is in power? It appears he will continue fighting as long as the West supplies him.
I think the Russians have come to the same view as you, which is the answer is no. And I think that they are gradually moving towards implementing the consequences of that conclusion. In other words, I think that they will move further and further west. And Lavrov gave a very interesting interview to RIA Novosti, in which he seemed to leave open the possibility that they would advance all the way west to Lviv.
Yeah. Rifi00 says January 20th, GOP will investigate January 6th, Epps Hunter, Biden, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and November 2020 elections for 2 years. Google, VA whistleblower Tarif Simon.
I agree with that completely. I think that's exactly what's coming.
Yep.
I think it's also what the Democrats are frightened of, by the way.
Exactly. They're frightened of it. Tired looking for name. Thank you for that super chat. Great channel. Thank you that very much. Colin, thank you for that super sticker. Eric, thank you for that super sticker. Falvi Pollard says checkmate in the super chat. Thank you for that. Pope Rackets Touch Me says hear about a possible prisoner exchange between the U.S. and Russia.
Bits about for some of these people that the Russians have captured. Well, we'll just have to see. I don't know whether this is true or not. By the way, there was that funny film, the strange film about with Lord of War or something. I can't remember what it's called.
I always get those confused. There's one Lord of War and there's one Dogs of War.
Dogs
one's with
of War. Okay.
Nicolas Cage and the other one's with Jonah Hill. I think the Nicolas Cage one is the one that you're talking about.
I think it's the one. Russian... Yeah, it's what is my understanding of it. Yeah, but as I said, I mean, we'll just have to see. I'm told that his feats, Victor Bout's feats, are wildly exaggerated. Well, how would I know? One way or the other. What will happen? We will see. The Russians do like to get their people back, and there might be an exchange.
Roman Vasiliev says, U.S. collapse possible scenario or wishful thinking?
No, as I said, I don't want to see it happen. I don't want to see it happen, but I accept that we are closer to that point than we've ever been in U.S. history, because we have a weakened financial architecture, a weakened industrial architecture, which people in the U.S., I mean, the bankers and people like that we talked about, they're completely in denial about. And at the same time, a deeply divided political class and political, not class, sorry, a situation where the population, a large part of the US population, rejects the political class. So this is a very, very difficult situation that the US is in. But it's come through bad times before, and I hope that it will again.
Sparky says Putin kicked out oligarchs who funded politics in the UK.
Yeah, and they've come to the UK and they fund politics here, and they undoubtedly play a role. Ex-Russian oligarchs, exiled oligarchs, I know for a fact, play a big role in keeping the anti-Putin drum going in the media here and amongst the political parties, of which they are significant owners. So that is partly answers the earlier question about why the British are so anti-Russian. But of course, that can only work where the ground is fertile, and it clearly is in Britain. And I don't know why to that extent it is.
Fran Brown says, do the British really deserve a goon like Truss running the country?
No, the British people don't deserve it, is the short answer. I mean, they're tough-minded. They made it fairly clear what they want. They don't want what Truss is going to supply to them, and they deserve a lot better than Truss.
Yeah. Ben Redwood says, any recommendation for a site or service to study Russian?
Alex, you're the person.
Lots of resources, but the best thing is to take lessons via Skype, or if you can do it in person, even better.
Yeah.
But that's the best, is to find an actual teacher.
Yes.
Where are we here? Let's see. Reza asked us about Macron and MBS. We did that. The Big Red Bear says the Ukraine is saying they're going to annihilate the Russians in Kharkov, and Westerners clap like seals as if it's going to happen. Sea Hedges wrote about it, where even the citizens within the West are delusional. He's not.
Yes. Can I just say, I mean, there's the Kherson offensive that we're hearing about. Back in May, it was the Kharkov offensive. Do you remember the Kharkov offensive that Ukraine launched, driving the Russians all the way to the Russian border? What became of that, you might ask? It went into reverse, and the Russians pushed the Ukrainians all the way back again.
Yep.
But of course, the failure of the Kharkov offensive is not something you talk about in the West. You now move on to Kherson.
Yeah. MT Mind Tab, thank you for that awesome super chat. MT Mind Tab, thank you very much. Liana says, oxymoron, investors are still looking to buy funds that are delivering transition to net zero carbon economy, while the EU is firing up coal plants. The EU is ruled by morons on all levels.
Yes.
Can't argue with that.
Can't argue with that, no.
Yeah. Summer of 1970 says, Bucky versus Vallejo and the repeal of the Glass-Steagall killed the American dream.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, and I think there's a lot of truth in that, actually. I mean, the upturning of a lot of these changes that were brought in after the great crash of 29 set the scene for the financial chaos that we see today, and it's astonishing that people didn't understand this.
Yeah.
And it was done by Clinton in the Clinton years.
Clintons, of course.
Yeah.
Sanjeva, thank you for that super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Sanjeva. Checkmate. We answered that. Johan says, usually you build a new house before burning down the old one. Europe has decided to burn down the old house, sanctions, without any idea where and how to build the new house.
Absolutely. Can I just repeat a point I made earlier, which is that the Europeans have spent 30 years, 20 years trying to diversify their energy from Russia. And they failed. And they still didn't learn the lesson, the implications of that. There is no alternative cheap energy source other than Russian gas, unless you're going to dig out the coal. And that's not going to be easy to do if you close down coal mines. You can't just reopen them. It's a technically difficult and demanding thing to do. And of course, if you want to meet your carbon emissions, if you really care about that as much as you pretend, then you shouldn't be using coal.
Mike Watts says the latest GDP numbers show the U.S. has had 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, yet the White House is coming out saying they aren't in recession.
I know, yeah. Of course, I mean, we must follow what the White House says. I mean, if they tell us they're not in recession, then it's obvious the figures are wrong. The figures are, by the way, wrong. The situation is much worse than the figures
Much
say.
worse, yeah, exactly.
There we go.
It's
not
wrong,
in the
but
way
in the
the
wrong
White
direction.
House wants us to think. Exactly, yeah.
Let's see. Danitza says, someone said something about food control. Remember the time when there were disease on pigs, cows, goats, etc., and a lot of farmers had to put down their animals.
Absolutely, I remember that
like
very
mad
well.
cow disease, I imagine.
Mad cow disease in Britain. I remember that very well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we, no doubt we'll be seeing more of that soon.
Yeah. Colbury says, thank you for your hard work. I have actually subscribed on Locals when they blocked Alex. It's an amazing platform. The Duran.locals.com. Absolutely. Thank you, Colbury, for that super chat. Zariel says, by the way, how was your live on Alex Jones yesterday?
It was good. It was excellent.
It was excellent. Robert Barnes was in
He was
top
in
form.
sparkling,
He's a natural.
sparkling form. Yeah, he is.
He's a
Absolutely.
natural host for
Yeah.
for a TV show, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that completely, wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Let's see. Moonbeam says, at the very least, if Pelosi does go, there's a chance she'll be blown up. We'll leave it there. Liana LK says, Alex, have you tried Michael Thomas's method in studying Russian? I use it for French and it's great. All else fails, happy to give free Russian lessons, as listening to you and Alexander's daily analysis is reward enough. Thank you, Liana, for that. I will definitely check out Michael Thomas's method. I will check that out for sure. Pascal, thank you for that super chat. Command Unit says, what should we do to be ready to deal with the upcoming recession? That doesn't include stopping me giving you guys money.
I can't give personal financial investment advice. That isn't something. We're a geopolitics channel. We're not that kind of analyst. But
I'll just say this: you know that it's coming, so you're halfway there to figuring out something.
Yeah.
At least you know, and most people, don't know what's about to come.
Exactly.
Alvin, thank you for that super sticker. Pope Rackets says WNBA player +1 for merchant of death arms dealer.
Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah,
thank you for that. Falvi Pollitt says, Alexander, what do you make of the Boris maneuvering to try and stay?
I don't think it's going to work. I mean, there's a push now to keep him on the ballot paper for the election, but I don't think it's going to work. And I think the fact that we're hearing now about him becoming NATO Secretary General tells us where the real interest is in parking him, if I can put it like this.
Is there a link to the InfoWars show Alexander was on? Please, I cannot find it from the link with the post. It's actually pinned on Locals. You'll see a link to Rumble. That's where you can just type in InfoWars and you'll find the show there, as well as band.video is where you will find it. From, where is it? Stevo Bolkakov, just trying out the Rumble rant for some support to you for the first time. What is better for you, Rumble rant or super chats on YT? Whatever is comfortable for you, Stevo. Rumble rants are great. We definitely... we like the Rumble platform very much. Van Stone 2000 says, I just came back from Germany. I've never seen so many trains on both sides of the Rhine moving so much coal and oil. And on the Rhine River boats, lots of full coal. You can see Germany going down.
Yeah, I agree.
Johan Brauer says, I spent 10 years studying Swedish and 5 years studying German. I have never needed Swedish, and the last time I needed German was 40 years ago. The right choices would have been Russian and Chinese. Very interesting. Asmi says, have you guys thought about doing a trip to Russia for some on-the-ground reporting? Thanks for all the work you do.
Well, very difficult to do at this time.
Yeah. I really want to go to Russia or Belarus, but it's quite a challenge. The setting up the itinerary and then figuring out how you're going to pay for stuff. And I mean, there's no Visa, no MasterCards. It's a challenge right now to travel there. Edward says, U.S. collapse. Over the past 3 months, I traveled through many major cities in the USA. Some places are a bit tatty, but no sign of collapse. If oblivious is the same as collapse.
No, I think this is true. I mean, I don't think we're in a collapse yet, but we are in a recession. And I hope we don't get a collapse in the US. In Britain, it's different. I mean, here we can see a sign that things are really starting to break down. The political class in Britain is in denial about it, but there's already complaints. We hear many complaints, people talking about how the Sunak Truss debates are surreal because they don't seem to acknowledge the realities of what conditions in Britain have become like.
Yeah. Hard to tell the USA will collapse visually because it always looks like that. That's a comment from Locals. from Radio Constantinopolis says Salvini-type governments for Europe are really ham-handed solutions under central bankers' controls. When will we see true national-minded governments in Europe?
I don't know is the short. I take your point also, by the way. I mean, at the moment, it's difficult to see a sustained challenge to the political class in Europe because it's one thing it's very skilled at is retaining control, and not just control politically, but control of narratives that people hear all the time. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to shape up. But you could have said the same if you'd gone to Eastern Europe in 1975 or 1980 even. I mean, there was pretty much control of the narrative there. It was very difficult to see how the East European communist governments, what the alternative to them was. But they all collapsed eventually. And systems collapse is not something that doesn't happen. It does. It can and it does.
Paul Duncan says, thank you for your analysis and commentary. Thank you for that, Paul. Rufus says, even if Ukraine army collapses, there will always be small sabotage groups attacking Russian territories. Where does this end? Must all Ukraine fall?
No, well, I think the short answer is, as I said, that the Russians are coming gradually to the conclusion that you are saying. I think they don't think any longer that there's any real prospect of a negotiated solution to this. Now, about sabotage groups, I think the Russians will eventually learn how to deal with those. They've done that before. They're very skilled at that sort of thing. They brought the Caucasus under control. I'm sure they'll bring Ukraine under control too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Summer of 1970 says, sure wish you guys could do a show with Jimmy Dore. That would be great.
So do we.
Yeah. let him know. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you for that, summer of 1970. Liana says, I got you guys going to Russia for a month next week. We'll send the reports from the ground. Please, Liana, please let us know how things are and let us know how easy it is to travel, how you get by paying for stuff and booking hotels and all of these things. I'm very interested in that. Brandon says, R.I.P. Gonzalo. Huh? I'm not sure I get that one, Brandon. Thank you for that super chat, though. And Radovid said, we could invite some financial experts as the economic disaster is looming. I would propose George Gammon, Manico 64, the Maverick of Wall Street, just to name a few. I would love to hear from someone new as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will look to do that. I mean, we're heading that way and, we'll definitely do it. Yes. I mean, consider yesterday, the Fed increased interest rates by, a certain amount, a good amount, into a recession. The US is going into recession and the Fed is increasing interest rates. Now, that's quite a big event, actually.
All right, let's do a couple of more and we'll wrap it up. Miss Texas says, what do you think is the future of Africa in light of the new Cold War in Europe?
I think, Africa might, if it gets itself organized, which is a big if, it might actually profit from this. It might learn to play the two power blocks off against each other and get pretty good deals with them. The danger is that, on the contrary, it will become like it happened during the Cold War, a battlefield with different countries being used as pawns in some great power game, and that would be a tragedy.
Yeah. Let's see. Lord Justcott says Tom Luongo screams from the treetops that the Fed is at war with Davos.
Yeah, I know he does. He's done it on our programs too.
Yes. Joanna Orlovska, thank you very much for that super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Joanna. Rubia says, thank you for brightening our days and giving a realistic picture. It's much appreciated. Do you think the EU will be forced to relinquish their sanctions and turn on Zelensky?
I would like to think so. I don't think it's going to happen, actually. I mean, who in the EU would do that? Germany, there might be conceivably a big change in Germany, which might lead to that. But the present EU leadership would never agree to do that.
All right. Great live. Great
Absolutely.
live stream.
Wow.
Alexander.
Fantastic live stream.
The Oracle of London in top form. Answered a lot of questions.
Yes.
A lot of different topics as well.
and yourself, Alex. And can I just say, I mean, the clown show things that you do are legends. I mean, my wife and I often, when we have a dull moment, we often switch on to them. Anyway, I highly recommend them to everybody.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you to everyone that was moderating. Valies, the fantastic Valies, the legend Zarael, the great Alan Watson, the wonderful GEC 812, the always smart, reckless abandon. And who else? We've got a great crew of moderators. Edward Bernice says total agreement with Alex's reply. Thank you very much for that, Edward, as well. Those were our moderators. I think I got everybody. Yes, I did. And thank you to everyone who sent us questions via Telegram. We got questions. We got questions from Odyssey and Rumble. And of course, the Duran.locals.com. Lawrence says, you guys and Barnes are the best. Please keep it up. Thank you very much, Lawrence, for that. JJHW says, thanks, Alex and Alexander, for the chat. And any final thoughts, Alexander, before we wrap it up?
Well, I hope we don't get into a collapse, but the big story today, make no mistake about it, is the confirmation that the US is in recession. And I've never heard of a situation where the party that is in government at the time when the recession comes in the US does well in the midterms. So there's going to be political implications for this, and they're going to be huge. They're going to be very huge, especially as, let's be quite clear about this, this recession could have been avoided. It's entirely the result of political decisions made by the Biden White House. From the moment it came into office, they tried to turbocharge the economy. That created an inflation crisis, and they made it worse with a sanctions war, which has gone catastrophically wrong. So this is the big news. It's going to have a calamitous effect in Europe. It's going to have effects all around the world. China is going to be affected too, because, you know, the US is still a big market and things are not altogether well in China either. So we're heading for dark, difficult economic times.
Yeah, V-Plan, thank you for that super sticker. And let's leave it with this thought from Sparky Alexander. Far from ideal, the US will benefit from being the last man standing in the West. Far from ideal.
I agree with that. I completely agree with that. In the West, I agree. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
All right. We will leave it there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this live stream this Thursday. Have a great day, and we'll be back tomorrow with more videos. Take care.